"Sir, you're under arrest." The words hit like a slap, cold and final. Judge Marcus Whitfield, a man who had spent his life fighting for justice, never imagined that a phone call would shake the very foundation of his beliefs and his heart. 2 sentences into the call, and his world tilted on its axis. The courtroom was empty now, the echoes of the day's proceedings fading into the silence. Marcus sat alone at the bench, his hand gripping the cold edge as his phone vibrated again. On the other end was a trembling, terrified voice, a voice that did not belong to his son because Marcus had no son. "Dad, please help me. They're coming. Please." The desperation was raw, suffocating. Marcus's throat tightened. The voice was so young, so scared yet familiar in a way that gnawed at his conscience. He knew, deep down, this was no mistake. Someone was calling him for help, and it was more than just a plea. It was a call for justice. Marcus had spent his career on the bench in a city where racial tensions simmered beneath the surface, ready to boil over at any moment. The law was his weapon against the prejudice that poisoned his community, but even he had not anticipated the personal test that was about to unfold. As the voice on the line continued to plead, Marcus's mind raced back to his own childhood in the South, where he had witnessed discrimination that left scars deeper than the eye could see. The memory of his mother's warnings echoed. "Always stand firm, Marcus, but never lose your heart." The voice spoke again, more urgently. "They don't believe me, Judge. They think I'm guilty, but I'm not. You have to help me." Marcus recognized the tone now. It was the same fear he saw in so many defendants who came before him, often black men caught in a system rigged against them. But this was different. This time, the call was personal. The judge's office was a sanctuary of law books, framed degrees, and photographs of his family. Yet, tonight, it felt like a cage. The phone call connected Marcus to a young black man named Jamal, a stranger whose fate now hung precariously between hope and despair. Jamal was wrongfully accused of drug possession set up by a system quick to judge him because of the color of his skin. "You don't know what they're capable of, sir," Jamal's voice cracked. "They're going to ruin me." Marcus's heart broke. Here was the cruel irony. A judge who had vowed to serve justice was powerless, at this moment, to protect a life crying out for fairness. The case that followed would become a landmark battle against racial prejudice in the justice system. Marcus faced opposition not just from prosecutors, but from within himself. The conflict between the law he upheld and the humanity he could no longer ignore. Would he be able to change a system built on suspicion and bias? Could one man's voice alter the course of justice? Or would the call freeze his heart forever? The sound of a child's plea lost in the cold halls of a blind judiciary? The dim glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows across the stacks of legal briefs and case files. Marcus Whitfield sat back in his leather chair, the phone still pressed against his ear, his knuckles whitening from the grip. The courtroom outside had emptied hours ago, but inside the judge's chambers, time seemed suspended. "Jamal, listen to me," Marcus said softly, fighting to keep his voice steady. "You need to stay calm. Tell me exactly what happened." There was a pause. Then a rush of words, frantic, hurried. "They said they found drugs on me," Jamal said, voice breaking with panic. "But I swear, I didn't do anything. I was just walking home. The cops stopped me for no reason. Then they planted stuff on me. I heard them talking." Marcus closed his eyes. He had heard this story more times than he cared to count. Too many young black men caught in a web of racial profiling, injustice, and broken promises. Yet, Jamal's desperation felt different, raw, urgent, impossibly real. "Where are you now?" Marcus asked. "In the holding cell at 5th Precinct. They won't let me call anyone else. I don't know what to do." A chill crept down Marcus's spine. That precinct was notorious for aggressive policing, for quick convictions, for ignoring the rights of people like Jamal. And yet, here was a judge, one of the few black judges in the city, caught in the middle of the storm. Marcus stood abruptly and paced his office, running his hand through his salt and pepper hair. The weight of the phone call pressed on him like a physical force. His mind raced. What could he do? He was bound by law and ethics, but the instinct to protect a life in danger was overwhelming. The irony was brutal. Marcus had spent decades fighting racism and injustice from the bench. He had seen the system fail again and again. But hearing Jamal's voice pleading, stirred something deeper inside him. A responsibility, a call to action that transcended the law books. He pulled open his desk drawer and grabbed his personal cell phone, then hesitated. This was risky. Judges were supposed to be impartial, untouchable pillars of the judiciary, not vigilantes or activists. Yet, Marcus knew the law was a shield for some and a cage for others. For Jamal, it was a cage. Marcus Whitfield. He whispered to himself, the name feeling heavier than usual. He tapped a number. The call connected. "Detective Simmons," came the gruff voice on the other end. "This is Judge Whitfield." "Your Honor," Simmons replied, surprise evident. "I need to discuss the case of Jamal Rivers. I want to ensure his rights are respected. Any evidence planting? Any misconduct?" There was silence. Simmons finally answered, "We follow procedure, Your Honor." Marcus knew better. He had read too many reports. Police misconduct was real, systemic. "I'll be watching closely," Marcus said firmly. No shortcuts. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Jamal's arraignment was delayed after Marcus made calls behind the scenes, quietly pushing for fairness. But the prosecutors pushed back, warning Marcus to stay out of the case. "You're a judge, not a crusader," one assistant prosecutor sneered. Marcus's response was cold. "Justice isn't a title, it's a duty." At night, Marcus sat in his study, listening to the recordings Jamal had secretly made with his phone, capturing officers discussing how to make the case stick. The evidence was damning. He felt a bitter mix of anger and helplessness. If the system wouldn't protect Jamal, then who would? Meanwhile, Jamal's family waited anxiously outside the courthouse. His mother, Denise, a strong woman hardened by years of struggle, refused to believe her son was guilty. "We know they're lying," she told reporters. "This is about the color of his skin, nothing else." The city was divided. Protests erupted. Some called for justice. Others demanded law and order without question. Marcus found himself torn, caught between his duty as a judge and the humanity he could no longer ignore. One afternoon, Marcus met Jamal's lawyer, a young public defender named Rachel Lee. Sharp, determined, and equally passionate about justice, Rachel brought a fresh energy to the fight. "We can win this," Rachel said confidently. "But we need to expose the corruption." Marcus nodded. "I'll do what I can from my side." Their alliance was quiet, but powerful, two voices rising against a system rigged against them. As the trial date approached, tension thickened in the courtroom. Marcus prepared to oversee the case, but knew this was no ordinary trial. This was a test of the city's soul. He reflected on the voice that had started it all, Jamal's plea for help. It had shattered his usual composure and reminded him of why he became a judge in the first place. To stand for those who couldn't stand for themselves. The morning of the trial, Marcus looked at the packed courtroom. Cameras, protesters, reporters, everyone waiting for the verdict. Jamal sat quietly, hope flickering in his eyes. Marcus took a deep breath and began the proceedings. The trial was grueling. Witnesses lied. Evidence was manipulated. But thanks to Rachel's relentless cross-examinations and the recordings Marcus had provided, the cracks in the prosecution's case began to show. Slowly, the truth seeped through. At the climax, the jury deliberated for hours. Marcus sat on the bench, heart pounding. When the verdict was finally read, not guilty, the courtroom erupted. Jamal's family wept with relief. Protesters cheered. And Marcus felt a rare, profound hope. But the story didn't end there. The fight against racial injustice was far from over. Marcus knew that Jamal's victory was just a battle won, not the war. As he left the courthouse, Marcus looked up at the sky and whispered, "Justice may be slow, but it must be relentless." After the courtroom emptied and the verdict was announced, Judge Marcus Whitfield found no solace in the fleeting victory. The cheers that echoed off the high ceilings had faded into the cold silence of his chambers, where only the ticking clock reminded him that time moved relentlessly forward, time for many who awaited justice, but time that seemed to slip away for too many others trapped in the system. Marcus leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Jamal's freedom was a triumph. Yes, but the system's rot ran deep. This case was just the tip of the iceberg. His phone buzzed again, a text from Rachel, Jamal's attorney. "We need to meet. There's more to this." In a cramped cafe a few blocks from the courthouse, Marcus and Rachel met over coffee. The weight of the day's victory was overshadowed by urgency. "Judge," Rachel said quietly, sliding a folder across the table, "Jamal told me something disturbing. The cops who arrested him weren't working alone. There's a network, a pattern of targeting young black men, fabricating evidence, and sweeping it under the rug. Marcus flipped through the pages, incident reports, surveillance footage summaries, anonymous tips. It's systemic, Rachel continued. And it's bigger than just one precinct. Marcus felt the cold grip of reality tighten. The law was not just a set of rules, it was a battlefield. And now, he had to decide whether to fight beyond the bench. The next day, Marcus convened a secret meeting with trusted allies, lawyers, activists, and community leaders who shared his commitment to justice. "We have to expose this," Marcus said, voice steady despite the fire in his chest. "If we don't, more Jamals will suffer the same fate." There was nodding, determination in their eyes. The fight was no longer just about one young man. It was about an entire system that had betrayed its own promise. Meanwhile, Jamal struggled to rebuild his life. The arrest and trial had left scars: his job lost, his reputation tarnished, his trust shattered. His mother, Denise, was a fierce protector, but even she felt the toll. "I'm proud of you, baby," she whispered, holding his hands tightly. "But this world, it's not kind." Jamal's eyes held a flicker of hope. "We'll change it, Ma. I won't let them win." Back in the courtroom, Marcus began to push for reforms. He lobbied for independent oversight of police conduct, stricter evidence protocols, and better training to combat racial bias. His efforts met resistance from politicians, police unions, even colleagues. "Stay in your lane, Judge," a colleague warned. "Don't mix justice with activism." But Marcus had long ago decided justice and activism were inseparable. At home, the phone rang late at night again. This time, it wasn't Jamal. It was a teenager from another neighborhood, frightened and alone. "Sir, I heard what you did for Jamal. Please, I need help." Marcus felt his heart seize. The voice was unfamiliar, the fear all too familiar. The fight was just beginning. Days turned into weeks as Marcus and his coalition gathered evidence, prepared cases, and rallied public support. The city stirred protests, news stories, social media campaigns, voices demanding change. Marcus stood at the center, a beacon of hope and resolve. But he knew the cost. The threats came: anonymous letters, late-night calls, the unrelenting pressure to back down. Yet, every time the phone rang with a frightened voice, he answered. One evening, after a long meeting, Marcus sat alone on his porch, the city lights flickering below. His wife, Angela, joined him quietly. "You're carrying the weight of the world," she said gently. "I can't stop," Marcus replied. "Not when so many depend on us." Angela squeezed his hand. "Just remember to take care of yourself too." He nodded, but inside, a storm raged. As the movement gained momentum, the judicial system began to change slowly, painfully, but undeniably. New policies were implemented. Officers found guilty of misconduct faced consequences. Communities found their voices. Jamal became an advocate, speaking at rallies, sharing his story. Marcus watched with pride, knowing the fight was far from over, but feeling that hope, at last, was taking root. The final scene unfolded in the courtroom once again. Marcus, presiding over a case involving police misconduct, looked across the room at the faces of the jury, diverse, attentive, and engaged. He took a deep breath. "Justice is not just a word," he began. "It is a promise. A promise we must keep, no matter how difficult the path." The gavel came down. And this time, the sound echoed not just in the courtroom, but in the hearts of a city ready to change. The final days of the trial had transformed into a crescendo of tension, hope, and unrelenting scrutiny. The courtroom was packed with advocates, journalists, and citizens from every corner of the city, all drawn to witness a battle that had become emblematic of a much larger struggle. Judge Marcus Whitfield took his place at the bench, his gaze steady yet weighed with the burdens of years of systemic injustice. Jamal Rivers, now standing not as a defendant but as a symbol of resistance, sat beside his lawyer, Rachel Lee, shoulders squared despite the heavy shadows of his past. The prosecution laid bare their case once more, but the cracks were impossible to ignore. Witnesses who had once testified in support of the police now faltered under Rachel's relentless questioning. The evidence was unraveling, revealing the manipulation and deceit that had placed Jamal behind bars. Marcus watched closely. The law was finally bending toward justice. During a recess, Marcus walked quietly down the marble halls of the courthouse, lost in thought. He remembered the night the phone call came, the desperate, innocent voice that had shattered his solitude and demanded action. That voice had awakened something inside him, something beyond the robe and gavel. A responsibility not only to uphold the law, but to change it. Outside the courthouse, protests swelled, voices chanting for justice, equality, and reform. The city pulsed with energy, a collective heartbeat echoing the promise of change. Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Jamal. "Judge." "Thank you," Jamal said simply. "No, Jamal," Marcus replied softly. "Thank you for trusting me." The verdict came swiftly. Not guilty. A collective exhale filled the courtroom. Jamal was free. But Marcus knew this was not the end, it was a new beginning. Weeks later, Marcus addressed a packed auditorium filled with law students, community leaders, and activists. He spoke not just as a judge, but as a man who had witnessed injustice firsthand. Justice is not the absence of fear or pain, Marcus declared. It is the courage to confront it. It is the commitment to fight for those whose voices are silenced. And it is a promise we must renew every day. The crowd erupted in applause, a powerful affirmation that change was possible. Jamal stood at Marcus's side, now a passionate advocate for reform. His journey from victim to voice inspired many. Together, they worked to establish programs supporting wrongfully accused individuals, pushing for police accountability and community empowerment. One evening, Marcus returned home to Angela. They sat quietly on their porch, the city lights twinkling below like distant stars. "You did something incredible," Angela said, taking his hand. Marcus smiled, the weight in his chest lighter but not gone. "I just answered a call," he said. "But sometimes that's all it takes." In the months that followed, the city slowly transformed. Policies shifted, attitudes softened, and hope flourished where despair once reigned. Marcus continued to preside over cases with renewed purpose, each decision a step toward a more just future. And every time his phone rang, Marcus answered knowing that somewhere, a voice was reaching out, hoping for help. He was ready. The story closes on a quiet note of resolve and humanity. A judge who heard a voice that wasn't his own, a young man who fought to reclaim his life, and a city awakening to the truth that justice must be more than a word, it must be lived. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.